going to give you guys a quick tutorial on how to make some square options for your Albers study this week. So first off, you want to go into your Photoshop. You can open it up. There should be a screen similar to this. These are my recent documents. But I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to do this in inches. I think that 3 by 6 is a pretty good smallish dimension. You can keep your resolution relatively high so you have nice crisp colors like RGB. All of this you don't have to mess with too much, but this is a good dimension in inches. White background is a good way to start. So here is my screen here, or my file. So I'm going to create, currently my window is Essentials, which I find pretty helpful and does most of what we need. I'm going to first create a shape. So there's a shape tool down here. I'm going to have it be selected as, I have it selected as square. Going to have no fill, but I'm going to have a stroke, which means an exterior edge. I have mine at just 1 point. You can select various points here. And then I have a solid line. So I'm going to just start in one corner, go to about halfway or so. That looks pretty good to me. You can always adjust from this point, but I'm going to hit return, solidify my shape. At this point, for ease, I'm just going to select it again. You can do it down here as well. I'm going to go Control C, copy. This can also be done with a right click. I believe, do I have, yeah, copy shape. But I just did with Control C, and then I'm going to Control V, paste an identical version. I'm going to just get this out of here. Move this over, find a nice location for it. I'm going to try to get it centered on that right side. And then I'm actually going to gently select and get these guys so they're in good orientation with one another. You can always adjust them slightly by selecting them and using your arrows. These are pretty fine lines, so if selecting them is awkward, you can always select them down here. Rectangle 1, rectangle 2. You can rename them if you like. I'm going to then create a small square. This is technically a square, but little do they know. So I'm going to start with a little square in the middle. I forgot to mention you can create a perfect square by hitting your shift. Oh, sorry, before you start. So when I go to start, if I hold my shift key down when I open it up, it means it's going to keep a perfect square for me. Didn't do that on the first one, but I think they're pretty close. Looks pretty good. Let me select that guy. So luckily these days there's guide tools that are pretty helpful for making sure you're in the center. So get that first one relatively centered. And I'm going to copy it, duplicate it, get this out of here so I can see. It should give me a good sense of when it's relatively in the center. So this is a good base for your Albers exercises. At this point, you can select, you guys can see down here, selecting all my layers. And I'm just going to merge my layers so they're all one document. If you just want to do all the exercises this way and all 6 of these, you want them to be identical in a classic Albers way, that's great. It's also a great way for you to just play around and get the color relationship understanding. You can also be more creative with these designs if you start to understand the visual relationships and you want to like play around with another fun shape or a scribble or a mark, especially if you're on a tablet and have a stylus, you can do that. At this point, I'm going to just create one document. I'm going to unlock the layer. So it's just one layer, just like this. At this point, if you're just going to keep it simple and straight to the point and you want to repeat this for all of your exercises, that is fine. You can go up here and save it as a template, and then you can you go in here and you would save it as a Photoshop document. You can name it whatever you want. You could be like Albers squares, for example. I will go ahead and save this so I have it. At this point, you can manipulate these various squares in different ways. So you're going to do that with a paint bucket tool. So you're going to select this tool, and then you're going to pick your color. So going down here, you can select a color. So I'm just going to pick, I have an affinity for purples. So I'm going to pick just a sort of a mid-tone. So versus light, middle, dark, saturated, darker value, I'm going to pick sort of a middle light, purple, and fill. I'm going to do make one look like two. So I'm going to make one color. This is identical color. I'm going to try and make it look like two colors. So if you were doing two colors look like one, you would want to have different colored squares in the center. And honestly, it's better if they're from the same spectrum. So it would be like a slightly more yellow orange and then a slightly more orange color that seem like they're from the same color selection. So from here, I'm just going to play around with a few different options. So especially for this exercise, you will both, honestly, you want to think about your grounds having distinctly different values, and in this scenario, different hues is also pretty helpful. Something to think about is these are often a little easier to play around with if you think about playing with colors that relate to your interior color. So in this case, I'm using purple, and I might want to use colors related to how purple is made, which in this case is red and blue. So I'm going to play around with a red to start, and I'm going to choose a bright red here. And then just to get some contrast, I'm going to go and play around with a lighter blue here. So right now, these two interior squares still look relatively similar. So just to play with some contrast, I'm going to lighten this guy. Oh, and already that left side is starting to look kind of pink, and this right side is starting to look a little bit more dull. Like this interior square looks a little bit darker than this right one. Just slightly. They're starting to shift. And as my eyes go back and forth, you're gonna, to check these, you want to have your eyes flash back and forth between the interior squares into the point where, and then kind of see them as a whole, and hopefully they'll appear subtly different from one another. But I want to make this more dramatic, so I'm going to go back to this pink color. Let's actually go full on red. And I'm going to go darker. I'm going to push, so right now these two values are pretty similar, and I'm going to push this exterior ground here to be a darker value than the interior. Oh, it's so dark. Let's try something a little more subtle. So already, this is pretty successful, but I think you could make it more successful. So right now when I'm seeing this interior square here starts to look more like a lavender. And then this interior square here looks more like a deep purple. It's pretty subtle still, but you can then play around with different color combinations, different intensities to see how dramatic of a difference. I'm feeling like more saturation in this case is helping us. So this is what I'm going to have you guys do. I'm going to play around. I'm going to do a mid saturation. And I think this would work. I think this would qualify. So this interior square looks looks lighter than this square over here. We could even play around. If you guys want to recapture a color you're already using, you can use your option. This is on a Mac. Option, it turns your cursor into a dropper, and that'll actually select whatever color you're over. So I'm going to select that color and then try playing around with this color. See, whoa, look how different that is. Beautiful. So just trying to see if I can make this darker, appear even darker, I should say. This could probably work with other hues. Could even try it with a complement. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to play around with these. Already that's pretty dramatic. This purple looks so much more darker, like more darker against a complement, especially when you play around with saturation. Oops. I went a little too far. But at this point, I think you guys could get the general idea. They're becoming more neutral again. But playing around until you get a dramatically different color relationship that makes the interior squares appear dramatically different from one another. Yeah, I'm trying to settle on a little. Yeah, this isn't a bad example. Ooh, see, look how pink this looks all of a sudden. This looks like more purple. This looks more like a pink. Using a more variation of a blue and more of a red, like magenta, playing around with the two elements of the components, I should say, that make up a purple. So this would be a successful example. When I goes back and forth between those two colors, I'm not convinced that they're the same, the exact same, because they're relative. They present as slightly different colors because of the ground that they are placed upon. So at this point, I would save this as. You wouldn't just save it because it might still be your template. You would save it as Alber squares 1 looks like 2. And you can save it as a JPEG. And you can even do A or B if because you have multiple examples. So this is just the most simple version. These don't have to be real large. They're relatively small. But then you'll do examples of 2 colors looking like 1 with 2 distinctly different interior squares. And they don't actually have to be that far apart. They just have to be noticeably different. And the nice thing is about digital submissions, I can check them in Photoshop by actually using the eyedropper tool.